Hey guys, welcome back to Enlightened Turtle. It's your host Kev here. So in today's video, which isn't going to be a very long video, we're going to be looking at some of the quotations from some of these ancient chroniclers who had discrepancies with the Trojan conflict as it became portrayed over time, and it became almost rigid in its its perceptions really, because obviously some people started to pronounce certain locations in Anatolia as the location of the Trojan War. And when we go through these quotes, I'm going to start with the most recent. I think I've got about 15-16 quotes. We'll start with the most recent and then work our way back to the most ancient. Like I say, these quotes aren't extensive. I've just got the little pieces that I need, pardon me, that I just want to document and put on this channel. And if anybody feels like they want to explore these further, they're more than free to do so. So like I say, we're going to move to the quotes, and it shouldn't take too long. So the first quote we've got is from Ammianus Marcellinus, and he's dated to 330 to 391 CE. So we're talking the 4th century AD. And the quote from Ammianus is, "It is uncertain whether the legends of Troy are grounded in truth or merely the inventions of men." And that's from his works Res Gestae. So already we've got Ammianus Marcellinus, and he's questioning the validity of the war, or was it just the invention of man? You know, those discrepancies are there for people to see. Second is Philostratus, who dated from 170 to 247 CE, and his quotation is, "The true Ilum is not what the Ilians show, but lies much deeper, buried under the ruins of time." And that's his work Heroicus, Heroicus. So again, you know, the true Ilum is not what the Ilians show, but lies much deeper, buried under the ruins of time. So one could theorize off the back of that and say, well, is he referring to the fact that Hisarlik was not dug up and buried, unearthed until a later date? So is he on about the wrong location? Or could you look at this more in the terms of the metaphor? And he's basically saying we don't know because it's been lost to time. All we've got is this Homeric account, you know. So next we go to Pausanias, who's dated to 110 to 180 CE, and his quote is, "There is, however, a difference of opinion, for some say that the ruins of Ilum lie in one place, others in another." And that's in his description of Greece. So as you see, you know, already there's a number of locations. This is gone the turn of the 1st millennium AD, talking the 2nd century AD, and there's numerous locations for Troy, numerous. Quote 4 in the list, we have Dio Chrysostom, and he dates to 40 to 120 CE. Perhaps it was not in the Troad at all, but elsewhere, or the story was an invention by the poets. And that's in his 11th oration. So here we have Dio Chrysostom, like questioning whether the Greeks actually invented the story of the Trojan War, because he can't seem to see the fruits of it. He can't see the actual evidence of it in the area. Next we have Plutarch, and he is 46 to 119 CE. I believe that these stories are just poetic fabrications, much like the tales of the gods, and that's in his work Moralia, his Greek questions. So again, Plutarch, I believe these stories are just poetic fabrications, much like the tales of the gods. So he's already like, I don't believe this. I think it's just a complete fabrication, like all these different pantheons of gods. Is a well-known character to the channel. So next we have Strabo, and he was 64 to 24 CE. It is not reasonable to suppose, it is not reasonable to suppose that the site of Ilum, famous for its wealth and power, should have been so insignificant as this. Now, he's obviously referring there to a location that is not historic, where, like I say, there's a number of these locations throughout the past. And maybe I'll do another video quoting where other people thought the Trojan conflict was, or the city of Troy, Ilum. Like, just reading there, should have been so insignificant as this. So it was a smaller settlement. He was expecting something far more grander. And indeed, when we look at Hisarlik, there's numerous layers throughout antiquity. However, people who support Hisarlik the strongest of what I'm becoming to see as a location for the Trojan conflict, they do not put the date of 1200 BC. They do not put the date of 1000 BC. They want to bring this date all the way forward, which is fine, and there's a number of, there's a number of researchers who support that, most notably this geezer here, well, both of them geezers, and the editor, Wilson Blackett. There is other people out there as well. I do believe Martials believes that there was two Trojan Wars, she tried to bring it together kind of thing. So there's a lot of different theories out there, but it's interesting that, we're still only at the turn of the second millennium AD, and already you've got all these chroniclers questioning the validity of Anatolia. So we've got Dionysius of Halicarnassus. Now this is our first BC chronicler. He was 60 to 7 BCE, so he lived 53 years. Quote, the story of Troy, as told by the poets, may have been altered by the passage of time, and we should not be too quick to accept it as historical truth. And that was in his Roman Antiquities. So again, already 2,000 years ago, people are sitting there looking at the evidence and stating that this may or may not be true. Not really have facts, no one was there, we've got no full-blown testimony, we haven't got a map, all the geography. All we've got is tales and these tributations in and around the Aegean, which I did do a Hellas Sea video pertaining to Iman Wilkins, where we did discuss a number of the locations in that video. I probably will do a more extensive one at some point where we can actually outline the true locations according to people like Iman of these original Greek words. I think like Crete, if I'm not mistaken, was called something like Kaftor or something similar like that. You have these older names attributed to these locations, yet apparently Menelaus was a king of Sparta, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not aware of any record that indicates there was a king Menelaus or a Mycenaean king in the city of Argos, which I don't believe is the city of Argos personally. But we've got no references of these guys, and you're like, these are the two most powerfulest brothers in the Aegean. You know, who's their father? Was it like Pylos or something like that? Forgive me if the name's wrong, but their father was a famous king and a demigod, if I'm not mistaken. So these people should have been highly venerated and adorned as kings. Plus, they went over to Turkey, didn't they, and absolutely destroyed the biggest rival in the area. Despite that, there's no record of this, or evidence of the conflict, or the giant fleet, or the kingdoms at this period, which is why a lot of people try and put the date in around 650 BC. But as we're starting to see the picture here, people 2,000 years ago could see that there was an issue here. And I do understand the synthesis of trying to match what's in Greece today to a Trojan conflict. However, there's too many parts that don't fit, for my liking anyway. And as time goes by, the next couple of weeks, we will be elaborating on this extensively. I was putting bits together last night, which is why I had to record or do my research, you know. And last night I was looking into the genetics more. Obviously we've discussed R1, but I wanted to understand the nuance a bit more, like what R1A is, what R1B is, R12, you know, or just R2. There's all these different subclades of R1, and I started actually doing some maps last night. They're not very good, if I'm being honest, but the maps, and while I'm narrating, they should hopefully be on the screen, and that way, as I'm walking through it, people can see the visual for themselves. So next up we have Parthenius of Nicaea, you know, the famous Council of Nicaea. And this is the 1st century BCE. The tales of Troy, like many of the ancient myths, have been adorned beyond recognition, and that's in his Erotica Pathemata. So again, stating this could be a myth because the facts don't match. There's no credibility in applying Anatolia, even at the end of the last century BCE. There's only about 5 or 6 more. So we have Cicero, who dates 106 to 43 BCE, and his quote is, "How many cities have been falsely glorified in verse, and how many heroes invented?" And that was his work, Devantione, I want to say that is. How many cities have been falsely glorified in verse, and how many heroes invented? So again, you know, he's saying we've got all these cities that are attributed to Troy, but we have no Troy. We have all these magnificent heroes, but we have no heroes. Where are they? You know, there's talk of how the Myrmidons and Achilles comes from up here, and you've got Odysseus, he comes over here from Pylos. You know, you've got all this stuff going on, and yet, where's the evidence? Even people going back thousands of years ago are struggling to see where all this ties in. Demetrius of Sepsis, and he's 3rd century BCE. Demetrius does not recognise the present Ilium as being the city of Troy, and that was referenced by Strabo in his work Geographia. So Demetrius does not recognise the present Ilium as being the city of Troy. So again, this ties into, almost leans some credibility in the direction of Hassalic, because people were looking at these sites going, this can't be Troy, this can't be Troy. All these cities, this can't be Troy. And fair play to Schliemann, to be fair. You know, he did, by all accounts, if I'm not mistaken, have a copy of the Iliad. And when he walk around Hassalic, he'd be trying to put the picture together in his mind. However, I think he was putting the wrong picture together. So, Eratosthenes, who's dated to 276 to 194 BCE, quote, "The story of the capture of Ilium whether it is a legend or whether it contains some historical truth is of little importance to me. And that was quoted by Strabo again in Geography. So, the story of the capture of Ilum, whether it is a legend or whether it contains some historical truth, is of little importance to me. So Eratosthenes, he's basically, no, I don't care. He's washed his hands of it. He's probably had enough by this point. Just don't forget, you know, much of the Greek world was built upon the Homeric poems. Now, there's the whole another video I've been editing a little bit the last couple of days is the Doric video. Now the type up's really big on it, so I'll split that into like 4 videos. I've got an update on Wandleberry that I want to do hopefully in the next week. That's all typed up and ready to go. I was a little bit surprised at further information I found out, and I actually come across a video last night, I think it was. I haven't watched it yet, so I might do a watch along with it. It was Megalithomania, and forgive me, I don't know what the chap's name was, but I watched the first like 5 minutes, and I know it's going to be good. Like, it looked like it's going to have some really good information in it. Like I say, I try and not watch stuff that I'm going to do myself, because I'm trying to get my own mind and my own perceptions into my work. But I've already done a few videos on Wandleberry now, so I think it's a good time to like maybe explore what other people are saying and see where my ideas line up with theirs. But in the first 5 minutes already of that video, I think he said he lived around Wandleberry, like he's from the area, so he's gonna have to know a lot of information that I could only read about. So I think I will do a watch along for that video. I think it was like an hour long, so it'll be a case of getting some snacks and some drinks and just sit there and watch it, maybe do a little discussion as we watch. Polybius from the 200 to 118 BCE. For indeed the poet, aiming at pleasing the ear, not at truth, often speak in hyperbole. That's in his book Histories. For indeed the poet, aiming at pleasing the ear, do not at truth often speak in hyperbole. So again, this is like, you know, there's not really truth, but we'll almost act upon it as if it is truth. I'm guessing he means the aiming at pleasing the ear, so basically telling people what they want to hear. But are we children of heroes? Yes, you are children of heroes and this, that and everything else, you know. And every nation has a certain mythology to it, you know. I put a question to Llewellyn again yesterday. I've asked him this question about 15 times, to be honest. Sometimes we'll go a bit more direct, sometimes we'll try and like do the sweet good cop bad cop approach, you know. But I'm really trying to ascertain what he believes is the lineage of Brutus, because this notion of beneath Pyridane and the true monarchy of Britain only goes back so far, and that's according to Wilson and Blackett as well. You know, they believe, obviously, you had the Albine migration, which was like, what, 1,000 years before they believed the Trojan conflict. So talking like up to nearly 1,500 years also before Brutus would have left, Italy, went to Anatolia, whatever, and then came back to Britain. So Llewellyn's like the heir to the Pendragon, or well, the Pendragon's like a wartime throne, isn't it? But it's like the seat of a high king, if you will. And we've had many discussions, me and Llewellyn, on this, to be honest. Sometimes it gets a bit heated, which is all well and good, you know, just shows both people are quite passionate, really. But I can't understand why the British monarchy starts at Brutus arriving, according to some people, around 350, 400 BC. So does that mean that the people who built Stonehenge people who built other megalithic constructions, all the Bronze Age constructions, all the earthworks and mounds, and you know, there's so much archaeology in Britain, and much of it's untapped, really. There's so much underground. Like, I'm part of a few different groups on Facebook, and some of the information I see people putting out there, I'm like, wow, if only I knew what that is, because it's still a question mark. We don't know. We get so many false dates attributed to sites in Britain as well. However, who is this culture all this time, through all this period? So even though we're talking about the mythology in Anatolia, of which the Greeks, they manifested out of, you know, that's not an old period. The classical age of Greece is not old. I mean, they call this, we're in postmodern times, aren't we? What would you call something 2,000 years, 2,500 years ago, when history goes back like 5, if you were to believe cuneiform and all its originals and stuff like this, you're talking 5,500 BC. You know, you've got earliest forms of writing over in Mesopotamia and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of nuance when it comes to history, and like trying to put your pins in the right places so you can build a coherent like chronology, if you will, which is why we've discussed the chronology in the past, and we will come back to that. However, I'd love to know from someone like Llewellyn, or anyone who's involved in British history, who is passionate about British history, have they studied this to the extent where they can say Brutus was the first king of Britain? Or can we say if Brutus came over and took the throne of Britain? Now, both ideas I don't align with anyway, but it's more to see what other people are trying to say in their arguments, because it doesn't make any rational sense to me. I believe personally, as we've outlined in the past and we will further in the future, I think Brutus just returned back to Britain, as we've seen in Dwy Van and Dwy Vach in the story from Richard Morgan. I don't have his book here, do I? No, but he mentions about the Isle of Wight, as I've said, you know, in that previous video with the chalk hills, and he mentions travelling back. We looked in that video, the Dwy Van Dwy Vach video, where we see, you know, you've got the Cymry, but then you have the Umri and all these different tribes that move along across Central Europe and into Anatolia. Not so much Anatolia on the western side, it's the eastern side of Turkey really. You know, we're talking Mount Ararat, around the Caucasus, Georgia, northern Mesopotamia, you know, this cradle there. When I was doing the blood grouping last night, and I was putting them on the map, I might as well elaborate a little bit on it now that I've mentioned it. You know, you've got R1 blood grouping, which is, this is its epicenter, the region I've just mentioned. R1A goes east, R1B goes west, which is interesting because then they're indicating that the A is their older lineage to the B, even though they're kind of the same. And then you get R2, which is found more in the lower portions of the Mediterranean, coming around into India, around this kind of stuff. You do get a small fraction coming up north. But what's interesting is the strongest focal point for R1 blood groupings now is in the west. Britain, Ireland, parts of Scandinavia, some parts of France, the Basque region, Portugal, you know, even as far as the Guanches, which I still got to do that video. That's going to be a good video, that. So we've got what seems like an origin in the west. Now you do get cultural diffusion and migrations, which does weaken down haplogroups. But it's not only the haplogroups. I've also been doing a lot of work trying to put this language thing together, and I'm making good progress on it, to be honest. And that's going to be a really good video. And what's brilliant about it is, I don't want to give too much away because we're going to get there and it's going to be exciting when we do. You know, it ties into the Dorians a lot, more than I thought. I can't help but wonder if we're seeing the extremity of a culture rather than an epicenter in the regions around Mesopotamia and stuff like that. Especially because, I mean, the Asians have a totally separate haplogroup. Theirs is like OYC or something like that. So it's not even cultural. It's not even compatible in that sense. It doesn't have the same origin as the R1 groupings. So this whole out of Africa thing just gets even more crazy, doesn't it? Because apparently we all came out of Africa, but then how do we have the epicenter of this R1 here, or potentially over here in the West? And then we have a totally separate blood grouping in Asia. Now, like I say, we'll elaborate more on that in that video. Eye colour, pigmentation, hair colour. We've got all of that stuff to discuss in that video. And like I say, it's going to be a pretty good one. So this is supposed to be a quick video and I'm waffling, my apologies. So we have Xanthus of Lydia, and this is the 5th century BCE now. Xanthus of Lydia says that Homer was wrong in placing the war at Troy. He reports another Troy in the interior, referenced by Strabo. So that was Strabo quoting somebody else again, because a lot of this text is gone. You know, we don't have the originals, which is, you know, it's a minefield, isn't it, really? Let's just leave it there. But yeah, so Xanthus of Lydia says that Homer was wrong in placing the war at Troy. So this was another Troy, not Hisarlik, in Anatolia. Like I say, there's several locations that people thought was Troy in Anatolia. We have Skylax. What a cool name that is. Scylax. Skylax of Carianda. And he is the 6th and the 5th century BCE. Periplus describes the Troy differently from Homer, though no direct quotes survive. So, again, you know, talking about hearsay a little bit there with that one. Heraclides of Ponticus, 4th century BCE. Heraclides Ponticus says that Troy was in Egypt and is referenced in Strabo in his book, referenced by Strabo in his book Geographica. Now, Geographica, should I say. Now that's interesting that, so we've got this notion that Troy was in Egypt. That's a new one on me, I have to be honest. And we have Hecataeus of Miletus. This is from the 550 to 476 BC. Hecataeus seems to have tried to reconcile the geography of Homer with that of reality, but it is clear there are discrepancies referenced in Strabo again, his work Geographica. So I want to leave it there because, like I said, I don't want it to be too long. There is more quotes out there. There's more ancient writers, modern writers. There's a lot of people who have discrepancies, but I just wanted to show that, you know, this goes back, like, what's the earliest quote we gave? 4th century AD, and the last one was the 6th century BC. So you've got like 1,000 years of people questioning whether Troy was at this Trojan location of Anatolia. Now, again, one could hypothesize, and rightly so, that if you were to take these historians and show them Hisarlik now, maybe they'd believe in Hisarlik as the location of Troy. But it wasn't just the brickwork, it wasn't just the site, it was the geography, topography, the culture, the history, the lineage. You know, where's the... If we're getting people writing in the 6th century BCE, and the war took place less than 100 years before that, you know, where's the fleet where's the armada of 1,000 ships? We should still, people only 200 years after should be able to go straight over to Anatolia and be like, it's there because that's where the Achaean camp was. That's where the city is. This is the river, this is that, this is that. Not much had changed in 200 years. We have Roman forts and villas in Britain that, you know, they're over 2,000 years old, and people can identify them. Then we get into that whole thing. So this is something else I was in me typing. I was trying to wrangle how to word it, but we do get, you know, a lot of occupational locations in Britain that are attributed to the Romans. Now, what was the Roman style of architecture? It was Doric. Isn't that fascinating, right? We have Doric columns and all this kind of stuff. Hey guys, I'm just going to interject really quick. Now, I've just mentioned about the Doric columns and the Doric architecture in Rome. And as I was going through the little edit, just trying to streamline it a little bit, I noticed I've referenced that. Now, I have got something here I want to read out. It's only brief, but I think it'll help paint the picture. The prevalence of Doric columns in Britain suggests that they were likely among the earliest architectural elements used by the Romans after their arrival. When the Romans first began their construction efforts in Britain, their primary focus was on establishing military control, which ties into what I'd said about the birth of Doric architecture with the arrival of the Dorians in the Aegean. This led to the building of forts, walls, and other structures, or practical structures, that required a style that was both sturdy and straightforward. Qualities inherent in the Doric order. Given its simplicity and robustness, the Doric style was well suited to these early projects. Again, so when the Romans came in, apparently all this Doric architecture that we find scattered and laying about the land, because we find more Doric columns than we do Corinthian or Ionian, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So the oldest architectural elements are Doric. Does that not show a Doric connection? The only way it could be a Roman connection is if all them sites are attributed to the Romans, which the mainstream does. As time went on and Roman Britain became more settled, the architectural styles likely evolved. With increased prosperity and stability, there was a shift towards more ornate styles, such as the Corinthian and the Ionic orders. Ionic being another element of the four dialectal fractions of the early Greeks, according to the mainstream. However, the early resilience or reliance on Doric columns for utilitarian structures meant that these columns were more common and more likely to survive the passage of time. So they're building in an excuse here for why we have more Doric columns in architecture. Their durability has ensured that they remain prominent in the archaeological record, even if more ornate styles became fashionable in later periods. I would say that was the Roman period. The Doric columns found in Britain probably represent the earlier phase of Roman architecture, focused on practicality and military needs. As Roman influence deepened, more decorative styles became popular, but the simpler Doric columns, built to last, have endured more prominently in Britain's historical landscape. Just kind of reiterating there. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to waffle too long here because we're going to get back to that video. However, isn't it quite clear here that we've got an ancient Doric influence? Now, you could say, well, the Romans, they conquered Sparta and places like that. They occupied Greece, so they would have had knowledge of this architecture. However, I would say that the Romans' ancestry is Doric. And again, I don't know if I touched on it so far, but I am going to do a really extensive Doric breakdown, and it's going to blow the lid off. It really is, because no one's talking about this, and I haven't seen anyone talking about this, but I'm really excited to get to that. But yeah, so the Doric columns are found all over Britain. They're the oldest form of Roman architecture in Britain, and the most prominent and long-lasting. Add this to the caveat that the mainstream basically whitewashes anything that is of a certain amount of grandeur. If it's not a roundhouse or a clunky megalithic construction, then it couldn't be Roman. It has to be British, and then vice versa. Anything that looks a bit more exotic, has a bit more craftsmanship and detail, then they say it has to be Roman and couldn't possibly be British. But yeah, we already know when Caesar comes to Britain, he says that they're kinsmen. But then at the same time, we get Caesar saying that they wear animal pelts. So, you know, what's going on here? And if the British legends are true and Brutus came to Britain, then he either brought with him a certain amount of, but it was the early Roman architecture. He went over to the Near East. Did he not pick up architecture from there? Again, that's all a moot point for me, because I believe he'd already come from Britain, his ancestry. I believe he already had certain architecture that possibly developed far more rapidly with the arrival into the Aegean. As we start to see the construction of a lot of these places, before we see the evolvement into more advanced styles like the Ionic, the Corinthian, you know. But that's for another discussion another day probably, but I just wanted to throw that in. So back to the video. That in itself is another topic for another day, but like I say, I'll give you the quick, let's see what videos have we got coming up. Let's get off that. If you look here, this is like my notes. These are all the folders I've got open. All the ones in red are videos ready to go. Like I've done the typo. You know, these are all basically, I like chapter size. Well, they are chapters. I'm trying to rebuild up all the information for my book again. Like I say, unfortunately, I lost all my data. My hard drive, my computer, and my phone, which was everything that I had in nearly 2 years of research. The beauty of it is, I have these hardback books. I invested, and I got myself a little library going. And plus, because I'd been tinkering over the 2 years, like a lot of it stuck. So it's just a case of now refining, and like I say, it's gonna be like 3 books, because the information's so extensive. And unfortunately, when we move forward and do some of these larger breakdowns as well, it's going to be a lot of talking. There's just no other way to do it. So hopefully you don't get too bored of the sound of my voice, and the information's engaging enough that people will stay locked in, because like I say, we're gonna have to get through a lot of stuff. This was just a little quotation that I really wanted to get out onto the channel, saying just getting back into the swinger of doing things. Hopefully this microphone's worked really well today. I've done a tinker little around with it. The camera's not the best, but there's nothing we can do about that for now. But yeah, like I say, I'm gonna leave it there. There was a good little video for me to just get back into the swing of it. I was at a druid, well, I was at a nature camp a few days ago over the weekend. Live music, I made that little video. Like I say, them kind of videos are just for me really, but it was a druidic wedding underneath a tree. I say druidic, you know, ancient Celtic wedding, I suppose. Reading from scrolls and underneath the oak tree and all this kind of stuff. Managed to buy myself an axe. Got myself an axe head. And got myself a big piece of hickory wood, so I'm going to be carving myself an axe over the next few weeks as well. Yes, I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for stopping by, guys. Hope you enjoyed that one. Like I say, there's a lot more quotes out there. If anyone's interested in following this, please do so. And if you want to tag me in something, tag me in it and I'll check it out. But yeah, catch you in the next video. Peace.